Hello friends, this is Pastor Ron and I am so excited today. We're going to do the first session on hospital visitation. Before I get into the lesson, I just want to share something. I want to thank you for responding to our plea, I guess, of having hospital visits. And we have, as of today, we have 74 people from our congregation who are signed up to do hospital visits, rehab. Some of them are going into homes. But anyway, it is just such an extraordinary response, and I just can't thank you enough. So today we're going to do actually the first lesson that I've already done, but I'm going to do it again so it gets up on our church website. So for some of you, this will be a repeat, but I think it'll be okay to go over it again anyway. So let's get started. One of the primary reasons hospital visits are so important is to show the patient and the family that not only does the church care, but God cares about them. And the reason why that's so important is because the hospital can be a very cold and sterile, lonely environment, and it can be very detrimental sometimes to a patient's recovery process. But just a short visit from a hospital visitor can cheer up the patient and bring them so much encouragement. In fact, it's been proven that hospital visits can help people recover faster. It helps them to reduce their anxiety and stress. A hospital visit can build morale. It can provide comfort and relief for not only the patient, but if there's family members there, and even sometimes you may have an opportunity to visit and minister to a hospital staff person. So really, like Paul says, we are ambassadors for Christ. Well, you're in presence in a hospital, you are an ambassador for Christ. And God will use you to intercede and to bring the presence of God into the room, and which to me is such a sacred place and a very sacred moment. In fact, hospital visitation is part of the healing and part of the suffering that a patient goes through. And I'd like to quote to you from Amy Carmichael, who was a missionary many years ago to India. And she wrote, "If I am inconsiderate about the comfort of others or their feelings or even their little weaknesses, if I am careless about their little hurts and miss opportunities to soothe their way, then I know nothing of Calvary love." Hospital ministry, in my opinion, is such a sacred honor, a sacred responsibility that God has given us. And when you walk into the room, you are really an extension of God's presence, of His love. And you bring joy, peace, patience maybe, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, mercy. And when you minister to somebody in the hospital, your presence is probably one of the most important gifts that you can give this patient and or their family or a friend. And friends, we just believe here at Evangelical Free Church of Green Valley that the visitation ministry is a vital part of our calling as a church. And what's so neat about doing this ministry is you don't have to have a title. You don't have to have all the training, for example, like I've had. But we can give you enough training and just a little bit of the ins and outs of hospital ministry so that you can bring the hope and encouragement to the patients that you will be assigned in the future. In fact, your role as a member of our hospital team gives you the unique opportunity and privilege to communicate with sick or injured people who matter to God, and that you have the opportunity to really definitely show them how much God cares about them. So I want to talk to you for just a few minutes about personal preparation. Hospital visits really begin when you're still at home. It begins really when Pat and I call you and ask you if you can go see Mr. Joe, for example. That's when it starts. because then you begin to pray and you ask God to prepare you for that visit, to prepare you for what you may encounter, and that God will give you wisdom and compassion and sensitivity, and to go as a loyal learner. That means that you are there to learn from the patient, to listen to what their needs are. What is their present state of health, their emotional or their spiritual needs? And then to ask God to fill you with the Holy Spirit as you prepare to visit the sick. And with that, I want to suggest to you at least four ways to prepare for that visit. And the first one is this, and be sure to write this down. You need to cultivate a servant's heart. Cultivate a servant's heart and love for God's people. Secondly, to maintain excellent character before God and others. If you have some personal issues going on in your life, maybe it has to do with the person you've been asked to visit, or it may not, but you just have some personal issues that are going on in your life that would impact your ability to effectively minister to this patient. I would ask you, please, to postpone or to find a replacement. And then thirdly, it's important to remember that God is the ultimate source of healing. Physicians only treat, and we are the messengers, but it's God who does the healing. And then I think number 4 is to have some preparation about the visit you're going to undertake, and balance that visit with a sense of discernment, to be listening carefully, observing what's going on with the patient, what's happening in the room, maybe with the medical staff around you. You can ask them questions, but be sensitive to the patient and to the family. And then for preparing for the visit, when Pat and I make a request for you to make a hospital visit, it's a good idea, if you can, to call the hospital to make sure the person is there and that they're available. Or you can contact us. Normally we try to make that easier for you by connecting with the hospital if at all possible, because oftentimes, and we've found this just recently, and it gets a little confusing, like St. Mary's Hospital, for example, we have people that go into the ER unit, and I made a hospital call there a couple weeks ago, and I was in the ER unit with somebody else from the church, and we were visiting one of our parishioners, and they allowed us into the room. And yet there have been people that we have sent there to visit people that are still in the ER, and they don't have access to them. They've been denied that access. So oftentimes I think it's best, maybe unless we've given you a heads up, to check with us to make sure that you have accessibility to the patient. And to be truthful, we can't guarantee that. You may go up there and find that regardless, you're unable to see the patient, but there is still a way to minister to that patient, and I'll talk a little bit about that later. But it's also important, even if you have access to the patient, to always be sensitive, because the patient might be in a procedure, they might be undergoing tests, or the truth is they just may not feel up to having a visit that day. Or what happens oftentimes, just to kind of give you an idea, Sarah Rita Hospital, I kind of have described it as a triage hospital. That is, that patients are taken from Green Valley by the paramedics to Sarah Rita. They're evaluated at Sarah Rita, and then oftentimes I've discovered they are then being transferred to one of the larger hospitals up in Tucson. So if you go to Sarah Rita, oftentimes it can happen that you have a very short window of opportunity to visit them. But you just have to use some good judgment and use your time and travel needs wisely. And then to remember that you are a representative of God in our church. So please conduct yourself accordingly. And I would suggest that one of the first things you do upon going to a hospital is to check at the nurse's station and to introduce yourself. Eventually, we will have badges for everybody, but I've kind of held off because it seems like every week we have people being added to our list, so I've kind of been waiting for a little bit to get those badges for you. But it's important to stop at the nurse's station because they can be a good resource for you. They can determine, maybe even if you can see the patient that day, they may tell you that the patient is resting, they've had a very challenging night and they need their rest, and it might be wise to come back later. Well, then you need to respect that. And then once when you arrive at the hospital, I just want to encourage you to always remember this one thing, and this is so important, that the visit is about the patient and not about you. If the patient is undergoing tests or treatments and you have no access to them at that time, but there's family there or a friend that's there visiting with them, and they're in the waiting room, and you find out from the nurse's station that they have family that's down in the waiting room, or they're in the lunchroom, that can be a great time for you to visit with a family member or a friend. And you can offer them comfort and a listening ear, and you can even offer them a prayer. And this is especially true if the patient is an intensive care unit, which, unless you're a pastor or immediate family member, you're not going to have admission to. But you can minister to the family members who may be out in the waiting room. And oftentimes I have found out from the nursing staff that the family's down in the lunchroom, and I'll go down there and I'll meet with them down there. I'll introduce myself to them if I don't know them or they don't know me. And I'll sit down and have a cup of coffee with them, maybe a bowl of soup or whatever. And I just spend that time with them, and it gives me a great opportunity to visit them. And that can be just such a powerful witness, it really can. And even at times when I've been unable to visit a patient and there's nobody else around, I'll go back to the nurse's station and I'll say, ask them, for example, I say, would you have a piece of paper and a pen? And they'll give it to me, and I'll write a little note, address it to who it is, and just to let them know that I was there for them and that I prayed for them, and then I'll sign my name, and then I'll ask the nursing staff to give it to the patient. And that can be so very powerful. So that's important. There's just ways to minister other than just actually see him directly. So that would be really important. In the hospital visiting hours, every hospital has policies that include specific times for visitation in order to maximize time for the patient to have rest and recuperation. Now, visitors are always welcome, but it can be very exhausting for the patient. And patients unknowingly, this is interesting, feel kind of the need to entertain us. So the only time that the hospital visiting hour should be ignored is if you are called into the hospital and there's a dire emergency. Then time is not important anymore, because if they are in intensive care and they are in very serious medical urgency, you need to have access to that patient. And so hospital visitation hours kind of go by the wayside. So just kind of bear that in mind. And if you ever have any doubts about any of this, please call me. I'll be happy to help you with that, okay? You're at the hospital, you walk down the hallway, you found Mr. Jones' room. Before you enter the patient's room, knock first. And then always introduce yourself and ask permission to enter, and then wait for them to answer. Remember, the patient's room is the patient's room. And then before you enter, there's always sanitizing containers near the entrance to the room. Make sure you use that to sanitize your hands thoroughly. You might want to find out, for example, if there's postings alongside the patient's door regarding certain, let's say, precautions for the visit. You may be asked to don a gown, a head net, gloves, socks, socks for your shoes, whatever. That may be required of you, and if you have any doubts about that, please just go back to the nursing station, because they will help you with that, okay? And then I would say please don't bring food to the patient's room. because patients are oftentimes on a very strict diet that may not allow them to have any kind of sugar or salt. So if you bring a McDonald's cheeseburger in there for them to have for lunch, that would be a no-no. I mean, if you ever have any doubts, you can check with the nursing station again. They will be able to tell you, but I just think it's the best policy. It's just not to bring food. That's really important. And when you enter the room, just be observant if there's kind of medical notices for you. For example, if you see an NPO, that's a Latin term for nothing by mouth. So you don't want to bring something in there that it's a liquid or whatever that they could drink because they've been told they can't have anything to drink by mouth. So please bear that in mind. Because the most important gift really that you can give is your smile, your personal warmth, your presence, which sends a much larger message to the patient. And always consider the comfort and well-being of the patient you are visiting, as well as other patients who may be in the room. Now, to make the most of your visit, when visiting the hospital, you are there to provide hope to the person that you are visiting. However, please be mindful of the unique needs of the patient so that good intentions are not inadvertently having a negative impact. For example, do not sit on the bed or lean against the bed. You may be even invited to sit on the bed and say, no thank you, but I would prefer to sit in a chair. And the reason is that there could be medical lines that are running underneath the covers that you're not aware of, and you could actually choke off a very important line for that patient. And then keep your conversation on topic. Be sensitive to the individual's privacy and needs, and please don't pry into their medical or highly personal matters. Avoid doing that. And then, this is really important, do not provide medical advice. For one thing, most of us aren't doctors, and the second thing, even if you were a doctor, you're not their doctor. So don't provide medical advice, and please don't say, well, when I had this condition, this is what they prescribed for me. Or I take an over-the-counter drug that's probably cheaper than what you have to pay for one here in the hospital. Just refrain from any kind of medical advice at all to the patient. And then please don't compare your health issues, even though they may be similar, because we all react differently. Our bodies are different. We heal different. We react different to medications and treatments that you and I would not incur. So even though there may be similarities, please don't say, well, when I had that, this is what I did, or this is what they did for me. Please refrain from doing that. And then offer to leave the room if medical procedures are being conducted or the medical team needs to discuss some vital information with the patient. If they come into the room, just kindly excuse yourself. Tell the patient, I'll be waiting outside until they are done concluding their visit. And then keep mobile devices shut off when conducting a hospital visit. You don't want to be listening to a patient and they're having a very challenging time in their life right now, and they may be even in tears, and then your cell phone goes off. So please make sure your cell phone is shut off. And again, I want to encourage you, don't bring your food or beverages to the patient's room. And then if the patient or family begins to confide in you or to invite you to share, please listen more than you speak and keep the conversation on focus with the patient. Don't pry into the patient's personal life or their illnesses, and don't provide advice about the patient's personal life or their health care. And please don't debate medical issues with the patient or become entrenched in some doctrinal matter. Proving yourself can be wrong for the patient. A patient should always feel better and be encouraged as a result of your visit. So avoid talking about your problems with the patient. Keep your verbal and nonverbal communication free from any influences that could challenge your objective to be an instrument of peace, grace, kindness, comfort, and healing. And then please be cheerful and pleasant. Listen intently. Speak with caution. Be aware of your volume and speak respectfully. And please be respectful of others who may be in the patient's room, the family, there may be friends there, but there may be other patients that are sharing the same room. And what I usually do at that time, and I don't do this all the time, but I have many times been led to really stop by the bed when I'm leaving the room, for example, and I'll introduce myself to them, and maybe in the conversation I'll say something like, would you mind if I prayed for you? And you know what? In 50-some years of doing this, I have never had one, I don't think I've ever had one person turn me down, at least not that I can remember anyway. And I always ask permission if I want to read a Bible verse or pray. I'll say something like this: would you mind if I read this Bible verse and prayed with you today? And then I always ask, how can I pray for you today? Because I want to focus on what their needs are and bring that before God. And I also encourage you to keep your visits relatively short based on the condition of the patient. And this is where sensitivity and being observant of what's going on in the patient becomes important. I was thinking when I was doing my clinical, I don't remember too much except that, they kind of expected our hospital visits to be no longer than 15 minutes. Now that, you can't hold true to that all the time because, again, the needs of the patient are most important, and the needs may be more to encounter than you can give in 15 minutes, so you need to stay longer, and that's perfectly fine. You will learn, if you keep doing this long enough, you'll learn to be sensitive to that, and they will give you clues if they want you to leave. Like if they say something, thank you for coming and visiting me today, I really appreciate that. That's usually a verbal clue that they're asking you to leave. So respect that and kindly, say goodbye, say if you've prayed, if you haven't prayed, do that, and then you can leave, and you'll leave on a good note. So please remember that. And if I walk in the room and the patient is on the phone, or they're watching television, or they're listening to some type of an audio program, well, first of all, I'll step out of the room if they're on the phone, and I'll wait till the phone call is concluded before I knock again and enter, ask if I can enter. And then if the television set is going, I ask them if they would mind turning it off. Because here's what I find: if you're talking to somebody and the television's on, you know where the eyes move? It moves from eye contact with you to this television set. And they get distracted real quickly. So by not having the television set on, you have a greater opportunity to have that person stay focused with you. So anyway, but I ask permission if they wouldn't mind turning the television off. And here's one that I think is, for some of us, it's going to be more meaningful than for others, but I just bring this up anyway. Don't practice preaching at the bedside. For one thing, patients aren't usually physically, emotionally, mentally ready for your Bible study or your homiletical presentation. That is just not the time. And always, finally, to remember that you're always under the institution's authority. So please respect the leadership that's on that premise, the doctors, the medical staff in its entirety, and submit to them and coordinate your visit with that facility and the hospital staff as much as you can. So I want to just conclude this lesson with just giving you 5 principles to be a good comforter. And here's the first one: just show up and be present. And if you visited somebody in the hospital, I would refrain from saying something like this: well, I'll be back in a couple of days to visit you. I would encourage you not to say that, and here's the reason why. You may not be coming back in 2 days. You may have forgotten to do that, or something came up and you couldn't do that, but you made a promise to this patient that you would return in 2 days and you didn't show up. So they're thinking, why didn't they show up? What went wrong? What happened? So don't make promises you can't keep. Secondly, feel as they feel. And the word we use for that is empathy. I'm not asking you to do sympathy here. I'm asking you to be an empathizer. Empathizing means that really, literally means to kind of crawl in the skin of the person that you're dealing or you're conversing with and feel what they might be feeling. Try to place yourself in their shoes because that will help you to be more sensitive to what their needs are. Thirdly, don't be turned off by what you see, hear, or smell. That's the hospital life. That's just the environment we're in. Fourthly, don't say much. A little bit of truth and tears are powerful. You are there to listen to them. You are there to encourage them to share what they're feeling, what they are experiencing, what their needs are. So don't say much. James says that, talks about that all the time, Be slow to speak. What's the other one? Quick to hear. And then finally, utilize the hospital chaplains when you feel the need. I have already, I think within the last 2 months, have used, for myself personally, 3 hospital chaplains. And what I have done with that is when one of our church family members is in the hospital, and I'm just giving an example that they're going through a very challenging time in their life, hospital chaplains can be such a valuable resource. So I'll call the pastoral care departments of the respective hospitals and ask to speak to a chaplain. And most of the time I'll only get a recording. So I will tell them who I am, who the patient is, and I will request them to visit that patient. And it's been, because they're actually an extension of our church ministry, you want to know the truth about it. Like me, they are specifically trained and have spent thousands of hours getting prepared for this. And they know what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. And they have an inside track to the hospital that even I wouldn't know because I'm not on staff there. But they can be so important for our people. So just use them. And if you're in a situation that comes up and you feel this is way beyond my ability, admit to that. Go to the nurses station and say, I need to have a hospital chaplain visit room 323 or something like that. So anyway, I just want to thank you for taking the time with me today. We're going to have some other lessons down the road here. But already, I think Denise has got it set up on the church's website. I think it's under hospital visits. So you can go up there and you can look at this lesson. And then Victor and I did a lesson last week that's already up there. And then in the next coming week, we will be doing some more lessons. So anyway, thank you so much for joining us today. God bless you today. And thank you for being a part of our team.